What would you do if you found something that wasn't yours? And inside it was a message that would change everything. This is the story of Marcus Webb, a 38-year-old man who was about to discover that sometimes the most important moments in life appear when we least expect them. Marcus sat on a worn wooden bench in Central Park, watching the leaves drift slowly to the ground. His shoes were scuffed, his jeans had a tear at the knee, and the jacket he wore had seen better days. It was Tuesday afternoon, and like most days, he had nowhere to be. Nowhere to be meant no job, no prospects, and no real direction. The weight of unemployment pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. He had a son. David was 7 years old, with curious eyes and a smile that could light up even the darkest room. But Marcus wasn't raising him alone by choice. He was raising him alone because that was what life had thrown at him. David's mother, Sarah, had started down a path that Marcus couldn't follow her on. The addiction had taken hold slowly at first. Then all at once, nights turned into arguments. Arguments turned into tears. And eventually, Marcus made the hardest decision of his life. He couldn't keep David in that environment. He couldn't watch his son grow up surrounded by that kind of darkness. So he'd fought for custody, and by some miracle, he'd won. Now it was just the two of them against the world. The money was running low. His savings account had dwindled to barely $300. The apartment they shared in Queens was paid up for another month. But after that, Marcus didn't know. He'd been looking for work everywhere. Fast food restaurants, warehouses, delivery services. But when employers saw his employment gap, saw that he'd been struggling for the past 2 years, something shifted in their eyes. Pity, sometimes. Judgment, often. But mostly rejection. Marcus stood up from the bench, deciding to walk a bit. Movement helped him think. Maybe walking would clear his head and give him some kind of clarity about what to do next. As he made his way along the path, his eyes caught something glinting in the sunlight. At first, he almost walked past it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe just curiosity, made him stop and look closer. A wallet, leather, expensive looking, sitting half hidden under a pile of fallen leaves. Marcus looked around to see if anyone nearby seemed to be searching for something. No one, just a usual park crowd. Joggers, nannies with strollers, an old couple holding hands on a bench. He bent down and picked it up, his fingers recognizing immediately that this wasn't some discount store wallet. This was the real thing. His first instinct was to turn it in at the park's information office. That was the right thing to do, wasn't it? But something made him pause. He opened it carefully. Inside, there was cash, more cash than Marcus had seen in months. Hundreds, maybe even thousands. His heart raced. For a moment, just a moment, his mind went to David. He could use this money. He could keep them afloat for months. He could finally breathe. But underneath the cash, there was something else. A letter. The envelope was thick, expensive-looking paper, and on the front, in elegant handwriting, were just 3 words. To whoever finds this. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. What he read would set him on a path he never could have imagined. The letter was handwritten, the penmanship perfect and deliberate. To whoever holds this letter, know that you were not meant to find this by accident. God sent you. I am in urgent need of someone I can trust, someone with integrity, someone who will not be swayed by money or greed. If you have the courage to make a call, to take a chance on something that might seem impossible, then please dial the number below immediately. My life depends on it. More than my life depends on it. Below the message was a phone number and a name, Richard Ashford. Marcus read the letter 3 times. His rational mind told him this was a scam or a prank or something altogether sinister. People didn't put letters in wallets expecting strangers to call them. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. But there was something in the words that held him. Something about the way the letter was written, the urgency, the specificity, the mention of God. Marcus had been raised in the church. His grandmother had taught him about faith when he was young. Life had tested that faith repeatedly, but was still there, buried beneath the layers of disappointment and struggle. He looked at the number again. Just a regular phone number. Nothing suspicious about it. Before he could overthink it further, before his doubt could consume him completely, Marcus pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. He dialed the number. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. Male, older, with an edge of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe? Hope? Hello? The voice said. Hi, Marcus began, his voice uncertain. I found a wallet in Central Park, and there was a letter inside. I'm not even sure why I'm calling. There was a moment of silence on the other end. The kind of silence that stretches out and makes you wonder if the connection has been lost. Then the voice came again, and this time it was filled with emotion. Where are you? The man asked urgently. Are you still in the park? Yes, Marcus said. I'm near the east entrance. Don't move, the man commanded. I'm 15 minutes away. Just don't move. And thank you. Thank you so much for calling. The line went dead. Marcus stood there, holding the phone to his ear, feeling like he was caught between 2 worlds. One was the world he knew, the world of financial struggle, of rejection letters, of worry about how to pay rent and keep food on the table. The other was something entirely unknown. What was happening? Why had he called? Why couldn't he shake the feeling that his life had just shifted on its axis? He waited. The park continued around him, indifferent to the moment that was about to unfold. Joggers passed by. The old couple on the bench kissed. A mother chased her laughing child across the grass. Life went on. But for Marcus Webb, life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly understand. And the question that hung in the air, the question that would drive the rest of the story forward, was simple. Who was Richard Ashford? And why did he believe that God had sent a stranger to find his wallet? The answer, when it came, would be more extraordinary than anything Marcus had ever experienced. Marcus waited on the bench where he had found the wallet, his heart racing, his mind filled with questions. 15 minutes passed like hours. He looked at his phone every few seconds, half expecting the call to have been some kind of prank, half praying that it was real. Then he appeared. A black, luxurious car pulled into the entrance closest to the park. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was approximately 60 years old, with perfectly groomed gray hair, and wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus had earned in 6 months. He walked toward Marcus with a determination that only comes from someone used to being in command. His name was Richard Ashford. When Richard reached the bench where Marcus was sitting, their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Richard simply observed Marcus, his worn clothes, his expression of confusion and discomfort, the way he stood up nervously. Then Richard smiled, but it wasn't an arrogant smile. It was something deeper, something that recognized something in the other. Did you open a wallet? Richard asked, his voice calm and measured. Yes, sir, Marcus replied, extending the wallet. I found a letter. I wasn't sure if... Richard gently raised his hand, interrupting him. He sat on the bench, right next to Marcus. For a moment, both remained silent, looking out at the park before them. Before we proceed, Richard said, his words deliberate and careful, I need to ask you a question. A very important question, Marcus. Marcus froze. How do you know my name? Richard ignored the question. Do you believe in God? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Marcus blinked. He didn't know what to say. Was this a trap? A test? He thought of his grandmother, who used to take him to church when he was young. He thought of all the nights he had prayed, asking for help that never seemed to come. He thought of David and how he had prayed for the strength to care for him. But when he answered, his voice was firm. True. Yes, sir. Of course I do. He is the owner of gold, of silver, of everything. He is the owner of all things in this world. Richard turned to look directly into Marcus's eyes. And in that moment, something passed between them. A recognition, an understanding that needed no words. You passed the test, Richard said simply. The two sat in silence for a few minutes. Richard continued looking out at the park, and Marcus didn't know whether to speak or wait. There were so many questions burning in his mind. Then Richard began to speak. Do you want to know who I am? Richard asked, though he didn't expect an answer. I am someone who has spent his entire life chasing money and power. I started from nothing, Marcus. Nothing. My father was a laborer, my mother was a maid. But I was hungry, I was ambitious, and I succeeded. Richard paused, his hands closing into fists. I managed to build an empire. I have properties all over the country. I have companies worth billions. I have cars, yachts, airplanes. I have everything a man could materially desire. But do you know what I'm most proud of, Marcus? Do you know what I'm most proud of? Marcus shook his head. Of having knocked people down. Of humiliating poor people who came to work for me. I saw them as less than human. As tools that I could discard when I no longer needed them. I was arrogant. I was cruel. And God does not appreciate arrogance. Richard's voice grew quieter, more broken. 3 years ago, I began to feel pain. It started in my chest and spread throughout my entire body. My doctor couldn't identify what it was. I took it to the best specialists in the country. Nothing. They ran every kind of test, performed every kind of procedure, and nobody knew what was happening to me. I spent millions on treatments, Marcus, medial, but the pain only got worse. It was like it was consuming me from the inside out. Richard paused for a long time, breathing deeply. There came a point where I knew I was dying. The doctors didn't want to admit it, but I knew. I felt in my soul that my time was running out. And that night, when I was lying in bed alone, in a mansion worth millions of dollars, I cried. I cried like a child. And I talked to God, not as a rich and powerful man talks to a beggar. I talked as a dying man talks to his creator. Richard's words echoed in the air around them, and Marcus could feel the absolute truth in them. I told God I was sorry, that I had been arrogant and cruel, that I had wasted my life on things that didn't matter. I asked for forgiveness. And that night, Marcus, God spoke to me, not with a voice I heard with my ears, but with a voice I heard in my soul. He said, "Stop your arrogance. Be humble with people. Be kind. Be the man you should have been from the beginning." Richard rolled up the sleeve of his jacket and showed his forearm to Marcus. "See that scar you see there? That was where the pain was most intense. 3 years of unbearable pain in that spot. 3 years, Marcus. The night I spoke to God, that pain disappeared. Completely. In the days that followed, all the pain disappeared. I went to the doctor expecting him to say he had found something, but the doctor looked at the test and said there was nothing wrong with me. Nothing. He couldn't explain it. Tests from 3 months ago showed a serious anomaly. Now, nothing. Normal." Richard looked at Marcus again. "God healed me, Marcus. And when he healed me, he also opened my eyes. I understood that money means nothing, that arrogance is the greatest of weaknesses, that God placed poor and humble people in my path to teach me the true lessons of life. And since then, I have tried to live differently. I have tried to be better." Marcus was in shock. All of this was too big, too intense. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. Richard smiled slightly. "Because you answer my question correctly. You believe in God, not because you expect something in return. You believe because your faith is pure. And because, Marcus, you are the kind of man God sent me to find." Richard stood up from the bench and placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Do you want a job?" Richard asked. Marcus blinked, confused. "What?" "A job. I am the owner of Ashford Motors. We build some of the most beautiful and expensive sports cars in the world. I need a general manager, someone I can trust, someone who has integrity, someone who isn't driven only by greed." "Sir, I don't have experience in—" Marcus began. "You have 2 things more important than experience," Richard interrupted. "You have character and you have faith. I can teach you everything you need to know about running a company, but I cannot teach you character. Either you have it or you don't. And you do." Marcus felt tears threaten his eyes. Are you serious?" "Completely serious," Richard confirmed. "The salary is $150,000 a year, plus performance-based bonuses. You will have an office in our building in Manhattan. You will have a team working for you. You will have opportunity for growth that you can't even imagine right now." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus finally managed to ask. Richard observed him for a long moment. Why? Because you found my wallet when you could have left it in a trash bin. Because you called when you could have kept the money. Because you answered yes when I asked if you believe in God. Because God sent me to find you. Richard took a business card from his jacket and handed it to Marcus. Monday. Present yourself at 9 in the morning at this address. Bring identification documents. You will start immediately. Then Richard turned and walked back to his car, leaving Marcus alone on the bench, holding a business card that would change his life forever. Marcus looked at the card. His hands were trembling. The park around him remained the same, indifferent to the miracle that had just happened. But nothing was the same anymore. He had a job. He had hope. He had a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, God had not abandoned him. Marcus picked up his phone and called his mother. Mom, I got a job, he said when she answered. I'll be able to take better care of David. I'll be able to... Mom, God has blessed me. God has heard me. And as Marcus walked home that day, walking the same path he had walked thousands of times before, but now with a completely different purpose, he knew that his life had turned a new page. But the story, in fact, had only just begun. There was still a final chapter to be written. A chapter that would reveal why Richard had really chosen Marcus. And a chapter that would show that sometimes the generosity of one person can create ripples that change not just one life, but multiple lives around it. The first 3 months were a period of transformation that Marcus could never have imagined possible. He woke up every day in a state of numb shock, as if waking from a dream he feared waking completely from. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. The salary deposited into his account every month. The apartment in Queens became a choice, not a necessity. He moved to a better neighborhood, a place where David could have a park nearby, where the streets were safe, where he could breathe for the first time in years. He bought new clothes, not expensive or vain, but decent. Clothes that made him feel like a dignified man, not like someone begging for charity. David transformed too. The child who had worried eyes now had bright eyes. He asked less, Dad, will we have food? And asked more about the world. Marcus enrolled him in a good school. He paid for the books, the uniforms, the extra classes. And he watched his son flourish. But there was something Marcus still didn't completely understand. Richard had offered him the job. Yes, and it was a legitimate job. Marcus was really the general manager of Ashford Motors. But there were moments when Richard looked at him in a way that seemed to carry a deeper meaning, as if there was more to the story, more of a reason why all of this was happening. 5 months after meeting in the park, Richard called Marcus to his office. This was a special office, not the main executive office, but a private studio on a separate floor of the building. Marcus had never been there before. When he entered, Richard was standing, looking out the window at Manhattan in the distance. He turned when he heard the door open. Sit down, Marcus, Richard said, pointing to a leather armchair. Marcus sat down. His heart raced a bit. It was a formal, deliberate summons. You have been an excellent employee, Richard began. Your numbers are impressive. The team respects you. You have brought innovation and integrity to every project. This makes me very happy. Thank you, sir, Marcus replied. I really appreciate the opportunity you've given me. Richard smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. He returned to his chair and sat down across from Marcus. There is something you need to know, Richard said. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but I needed to see first. I needed to confirm that you were truly the man God sent me to find. Marcus felt his body grow tense. When I placed that wallet in that park, Marcus, it was intentional, Richard continued. I knew someone would find it. And I knew that someone had to be a special person. A person with faith. A person with integrity. A person who couldn't be corrupted by money or greed. Marcus blinked. You placed the wallet there intentionally? Yes, Richard confirmed. I had spent months preparing for this. I visited that park hundreds of times, observing, praying, asking God to send me the right person. And then one day, Marcus, you were there, sitting on that bench with that desperate look. But that look still had hope. That look still had faith. I felt it. I felt that you were the person. So you were watching me? Marcus asked, bewildered. Yes, Richard answered. After you called, I found out everything about you. Your work history, your situation with your son, your personal story. And the more I learned, the more certain I became that God had guided me correctly. Richard leaned forward. But there is more, Marcus. There is a reason why you were in that park on that exact day. A reason that goes beyond coincidence. Richard stood up and walked to a bookshelf on his wall. He removed an album of old photographs. When he returned, he opened it for Marcus. The photographs showed Richard when he was younger. But it wasn't just Richard. There were women in various photographs. Different women. And in many of the photos, Richard had that same arrogant look he had described. A lack of compassion, a cold superiority. But there was one particular photograph. A photo of Richard, still young, perhaps in his early 30s, in an office. Next to him, sitting in a chair, was a young woman. She had unhappy eyes, and in her arms was a small child. What photograph is this? Marcus asked. Richard breathed deeply. This is a photograph of Emma. Emma was a woman who worked for me 35 years ago. She was my secretary, and this was her daughter, Sarah. Marcus felt the blood freeze in his veins. Sarah, he whispered. Yes, Richard confirmed. Sarah, the mother of your son, David. The world around Marcus began to spin. He couldn't process what was being said. Richard continued. I had a brief relationship with Emma. When she worked for me, it was during a time when I was especially cruel and selfish. When Emma discovered she was pregnant, she tried to tell me, but I refused her. I denied responsibility. I treated her like she was nothing. She was abandoned by me, Marcus. She raised Sarah alone, working multiple jobs, doing the best she could. Richard's voice broke. Emma died when Sarah was 17 years old. A heart disease. Quick, without warning. Sarah had no one. She didn't even know her father. Not really. And she got lost after that, Marcus. Without emotional support, without structure, she started using drugs. I tried to find her whereabouts several times over years, but she disappeared into the streets. Richard looked directly at Marcus. But there is more, Marcus. There is a reason why you were in that park on that exact day. A reason that goes beyond coincidence. Richard stood up and walked to a bookshelf on his wall. He removed an album of old photographs. When he returned, he opened it for Marcus. The photographs showed Richard when he was younger. But it wasn't just Richard. There were women in various photographs. Different women. And in many of the photos, Richard had that same arrogant look he had described. A lack of compassion. A cold superiority. But there was one particular photograph. A photo of Richard, still young, perhaps in his early 30s, in an office. Next to him, sitting in a chair, was a young woman. She had unhappy eyes, and in her arms was a small child. What photograph is this? Marcus asked. Richard breathed deeply. This is a photograph of Emma. Emma was a woman who worked for me 35 years ago. She was my secretary, and this was her daughter, Sarah. Marcus felt the blood freeze in his veins. Sarah, he whispered. Yes, Richard confirmed. Sarah, the mother of your son, David. The world around Marcus began to spin. He couldn't process what was being said. Richard continued. I had a brief relationship with Emma. When she worked for me, it was during a time when I was especially cruel and selfish. When Emma discovered she was pregnant, she tried to tell me, but I refused her. I denied responsibility. I treated her like she was nothing. She was abandoned by me, Marcus. She raised Sarah alone, working multiple jobs, doing the best she could. Richard's voice broke. Emma died when Sarah was 17 years old. A heart disease. Quick, without warning. Sarah had no one. She didn't even know her father. Not really. And she got lost after that, Marcus. Without emotional support, without structure, she started using drugs. I tried to find her whereabouts several times over years, but she disappeared into the streets. Richard looked directly at Marcus. When you called from the park, When you mentioned your name, I started asking questions. I discovered that you were raising a boy alone. I discovered that the boy's mother was a woman named Sarah who had lost custody because of a struggle with addiction. And when I discovered this information, Marcus, my heart almost stopped. You're a David grandfather? Marcus whispered, still unable to believe it. Biologically, yes, Richard replied. But I carry a lot of guilt for this, Marcus. My arrogance, my cruelty, my lack of compassion created a cascade of events that affected generations. Emma raised Sarah alone. Sarah, without emotional support and without a father, got lost. And David could have had a different life if I had been a better man. Richard stood up and walked to the window again. When God healed me, when he changed my heart and made me humble, he put all of this before me. He showed me the cascade of pain my life had created, and he gave me a chance to correct it. Not completely. I can't bring Emma back. I can't undo Sarah's suffering, but I can take care of David. I can help you, who are a good and kind man, doing everything right. I can break the cycle. Marcus felt tears stream down his face. So all of this, he began, was not coincidence, Richard finished. It was God. It was divine providence. You were in that park that day because God put you there. Because God knew you were just a man who deserved help. And because God knew I needed to correct my mistakes. Richard returned to his chair. There is one more thing, Marcus. I left something in my will. I am a man of 60 years. I don't know how much longer I have on this earth, but I left instructions. If anything happens to me, half of my property goes to David, not as charity, but as compensation for the injustices my life caused to his family. And you, Marcus, will be his guardian and administrator of his assets until he is 25 years old. Marcus couldn't speak. It was all too much. It was too big. Why are you telling me this now? Marcus managed to ask. Because you need to know the truth, Richard answered. Because we deserve to live our lives in truth, not in lies or secrets. And because, Marcus, I want you to know that you were not chosen by accident. You were chosen by God. You are an important part of this divine plan. In the months that followed, Marcus's life changed again, but this time in a deeper way. He visited Sarah at a rehabilitation center where Richard had placed her. She was working on her recovery, trying to fix herself. Richard paid for her treatment, her therapy, her education. It wasn't easy. Sarah had suffered a lot, and there were deep scars. But there was hope now. There was possibility. David, not knowing the whole story, Marcus decided to wait until he was older, now had a grandfather. Richard visited him, spent time with him, and taught him about the value of compassion and humility. David loved his grandfather, and Richard, finally, had a reason to smile beyond money and power. A year later, Marcus was supervising construction of a new car model in the design studio at Ashford Motors. It was a special car, innovative design, impressive engineering. But what made it special was that Richard had insisted it be dedicated to the memory of Emma, for the woman who was my fault and who deserved better. Richard had said when he proposed the idea, and at the dedication, in front of hundreds of employees at Ashford Motors, Richard gave a speech that would change the way everyone saw him. A year ago, I was a different man, Richard began. I was someone who believed that wealth and power were all that mattered. Someone who had no room in his heart for compassion or humility. And then God showed me the error of my ways. It wasn't easy. God wasn't gentle. He was necessary. The room fell into absolute silence. This car is dedicated to the memory of Emma, an extraordinary woman I raised with negligence. It is dedicated to her descendants who are here in this room. And it is dedicated to all of us, because we can all be better. We can all have more compassion, more humility, more faith. We can all be healed by God's grace, if we only allow it. Richard looked at Marcus, who was sitting in the front row next to David. I spent my entire life chasing the next deal, the next profit, the next acquisition. But true success is not measured in dollars, Marcus, and everyone here should know that. It is measured in the quality of our lives, in the depth of our relationships, and in the way we treat those who have less than us. That night, when Marcus took David home. The 7-year-old boy asked, "Dad, is Grandfather Richard like a superhero?" Marcus smiled. "Yes, my son. Yes, he is. But not because he has a lot of money or a lot of power, but because he had the courage to recognize that he was wrong and had the humility to change." How does someone become like that? David asked, "How can someone change so much?" Marcus thought about the question. He thought about the wallet in the park. He thought about the chance, or lack thereof, that had brought all of this. He thought about God, about faith, about providence. "With faith, son," Marcus answered finally, "with the belief that there is something greater than us, with the willingness to listen when God speaks, and with the courage to change when we know we are wrong." David wrapped his arm around Marcus's neck. "Well, I'm grateful for you, Dad. You've always been my superhero." In that moment, Marcus cried. He cried for the journey he had traveled. He cried for the unexpected grace he had received. And he cried for the certainty that the future now was bright. Months later, Emma, that first Emma, Sarah's mother, that woman who had been neglected by Richard, would be remembered not just by a car, but by a legacy. Sarah, after completing her rehabilitation program, became a counselor for victims of addiction. Using her own story of pain and recovery, she helped other people find their way back. Richard, during his remaining years, doctors never could explain why his illness had disappeared so completely, dedicated himself to charitable work. He created a foundation that helped people in poverty, especially those trying to build better lives for their children. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't seek gratitude. He simply gave and helped in silence, with the knowledge that God was watching. And Marcus? Marcus became not just a successful manager, but an admired leader. He became someone who promoted compassion and integrity within his company. He became a father who taught his son that true wealth was not material, but spiritual. Sometimes, on days off, Marcus and David would go to Central Park, that park where it all began. They would sit on the same bench where Marcus had found the wallet, and Marcus would tell the story again. He would tell how a jobless and desperate man had found something he wasn't looking for, how a simple act of integrity, returning something that wasn't his, had changed his life forever. "Dad, do you think God does this with other people?" David would ask, "Do you think he places miracles in the path of those who need them most?" Marcus would look at his son, at the boy who had been raised in poverty, but who now had hope, education, and a bright future ahead. "Yes, my son," he would answer, "I think so. But the miracle is not always a wallet full of money. Sometimes it's a second chance. Sometimes it's someone who believes in you when you stop believing in yourself. And sometimes it's simply the courage to do the right thing, even when no one is watching." And as the sun set over Central Park, and as the two sat together in peace, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that his life had been touched by the hand of God, that everything had happened for a reason, and that the miracle was not the past, but the future, a future full of possibilities, full of love, full of faith. The wallet had been just the beginning, just the key that opened a door to a new life. But the true miracle was this, the transformation of a heart, the transformation of Richard from an arrogant man to a humble man, the transformation of a broken life into a whole life, and the transformation of despair into hope. And this, dear reader, is a true story of Marcus Webb and Richard Ashford, a story of faith, a story of redemption, a story that reminds us that not everything in this world is explained by logic, that there's a greater force working, guiding, blessing, and that sometimes, when you are at your lowest point, when you think nothing else can go right, God places a wall in your path. He can place a special person in your path. He can open a door you never saw before. All you need to do is believe. All you need to do is have faith. All you need to do is do the right thing, even when no one is watching, because God is always watching, and God rewards those who have faith.